Hello, 8th grade. Warm-up activity for this week, one of my favorite subjects ever, is food. So I'm going to show you mine, but I'm going to show you really quickly because I do not want to influence you. I want you to think of your own and I want you to be creative, but sometimes you need some guidelines to get started. Here is Miss Doherty's food, and we've gone from pizza to ice cream to hamburgers to carrots to a lollipop and a banana. You think of whatever kind of food you like, and we're going to stop the video, give you 5 minutes to do that, and then we'll get on with the lesson. Okay, so we have our one Miro composition all worked out, vertical or horizontal, in pencil with all of those different shapes and lines on there. Let me show you what we're going to do next. Okay, so our next step is to take a Sharpie and kind of fill in and outline some of these things. Remember, some things are all filled in completely, so you can do that with the Sharpie. But like, look at this arrow. The point is filled in, but the end of the arrow is not. So you're going to have to kind of think about that and figure all that stuff out. And then you'll just take that Sharpie and trace over your lines very carefully and neatly, and then fill them in where necessary. Nice and neat, no scribble scrabble, no white spaces showing, nice and solid. And then, of course, as anything we do with a Sharpie marker and some pencil lines, once you get completely finished, you'll go back and erase those pencil lines so that you're left with that clean Sharpie on there. All right, so I'll give you some time to do that. Let me just remind you that what we're looking for here is composition. So if you really feel like you have an empty space somewhere around here, then look through your little chart and add another shape in there somewhere to make that a balanced composition or an interesting composition. We don't want everything all bunched up into one space and nothing in the other space. Okay, so everything's been outlined or filled in where appropriate, and all my pencil lines have been erased. So the last step for today is that you are going to take a piece of newspaper to protect your desk, and you're going to put a slight little background in there. So you're going to select some paint. This time I selected a little bit of red paint, and I'm just going to tap my brush into the red paint and not paint on my painting. I want to do a dry brush. So if you remember, a dry brush means that your brush is so dry that it barely shows any color, and it does show lots of brush strokes. So this is where your newspaper comes in handy. On the newspaper, on the edge, you're going to just dry out that brush. Really wipe it off so there's hardly anything left on that brush, and it starts to give you those little dry strokes on there. And then on your paper, I want you to just work through and give it some dry brush. So you're giving it a little bit of texture and a little bit of color. I'm not even going to go back to this container of paint. I'm going to go over here to my newspaper and just get a little bit more on my brush. Make sure it's nice and dry, and just continue to just go back and forth in kind of a X motion and give myself a little bit of texture on the paper. If I run out, then maybe I'll give it a little tap, tap, tap. Always do it on the newspaper first to get it dry, and then just start putting a little bit on there. Not much. You don't want it too dark. You're just giving it a little bit of background paint. Tap, tap, tap on the newspaper, and then lightly giving it a little bit of dry brush all over to give it some texture. Maybe tap, 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 newspaper, and a little bit of dry brush to give it just some texture in the background on your paper. All right, so that's it. I'm done. I'm going to let this dry, and then next week we're going to go back in and give it some color. Let me show you what one looks like that has a cool color in the background instead of a warm color. So here's one that has just a little bit of dry brush stroke in there with a cool color in the background. So you select whatever color you want to. The idea is that it's a very light dry brush, and that's why you're going to use this newspaper to really dry your brush off and make sure that a lot of the paint is out of your brush and you are just barely getting some strokes in there to give it a little bit of just a faded dry brush stroke on your composition. All right, so get those two things done, the black outlining and the dry brush stroke. Let that dry, and next week we'll start filling it in with some color. Great job. We'll see you next week.